The front door shut with a soft click. Daniel Wright, a 38-year-old millionaire known for his sharp instincts and even sharper suits, froze in the middle of his living room. He watched as the woman walked in without hesitation. She placed her small leather suitcase gently on the hardwood floor, straightened her cream-colored dress, and looked directly into his eyes. Her smile was calm, controlled, familiar. "Hello, Daniel," she said, her voice low, confident. Daniel's brows furrowed. Something about the way she said his name, it wasn't casual. It wasn't uncertain, like someone meeting him for the first time. It sounded like someone who had known him before. But that couldn't be possible. He took a step forward, keeping his voice measured. "Have we met before?" She tilted her head and smiled again, this time more gently, as if he had asked something obvious. "Why do you ask?" Daniel ignored her question. He had rented this woman for a reason. A temporary arrangement. 1 week. She was supposed to play the role of his wife for a series of public events, the investment summit, the charity gala, and 2 private dinners with potential partners. Appearances mattered in his world, and a perfect-looking, poised woman on his arm gave the image of stability. That's all it was supposed to be, an image. The agency had sent over her profile weeks ago. She'd passed all the background checks. Her name was Emma Grace, age 32, with a history in theater and occasional modeling gigs. Polished, presentable, discreet. That was all he needed. All he wanted. But now, standing in his penthouse like she owned the space, she didn't feel like a stranger. "You've never been here before, right?" Daniel asked, carefully studying her face. She stepped toward the large windows overlooking the city skyline and folded her arms. "Are you sure about that?" A strange chill passed through him. Her tone, it wasn't threatening, but it wasn't harmless either. He cleared his throat. "Let's keep this professional. You know the schedule. Gala on Friday, 2 formal dinners, and a few public outings. You'll be compensated afterward, as agreed." Emma turned around slowly. "Of course. I'm just here to play the part you asked for." But her eyes held something deeper. Something that made Daniel uncomfortable. Later that evening, they attended the first event together, a formal dinner with investors at a 5-star restaurant on the harbor. Emma walked beside him in a navy blue evening gown, looking effortlessly elegant. Heads turned. She smiled at the right people, said the right things, and held his arm like they'd been married for years. But what really shook Daniel was what happened when they arrived. The maitre d' greeted her, not him. "Welcome back, ma'am," the man said warmly, before catching himself. "I mean, welcome." Daniel raised an eyebrow. Emma just smiled and nodded politely. When they sat down, Daniel leaned in slightly, whispering across the table, "Been here before?" "I read up on your favorite places," she replied casually, sipping her water. "I like to be prepared." But Daniel knew something wasn't right. Her gestures, her tone, her timing, it was too smooth. Too natural. She wasn't acting like someone pretending to be close to him. She was acting like someone who already was. That night, back at the penthouse, Daniel poured himself a drink and opened her file again. Her agency profile showed a standard resume, nothing alarming. Her real name was supposedly Emma Grace. No known family. No social media. No debt. Nothing personal. Almost too clean. He was about to shut his laptop when he noticed something odd. In one of the scanned ID documents, the background looked strangely familiar. A blurry photo frame on a wall. A window. A skyline that looked exactly like the view from his childhood home. His hands froze. That home had been torn down years ago. His childhood was something he'd buried deep. Especially after his parents died in a car crash when he was 16. After that, he was sent to live with distant relatives, bounced between homes, and eventually built his life from scratch. No family. No real memories. He never looked back. And yet, here she was. In the middle of the night, Daniel walked down the hallway toward the guest bedroom. The door was slightly open. Light spilled out from the lamp on the nightstand. He pushed the door open. She wasn't there. Instead, he found a photo on the dresser. An old, faded one. A black and white picture. His heart stopped. It was him. Maybe 15 or 16. Standing in a field. Beside a woman with long hair. Daniel's memory flashed. It wasn't a clear one. Just a fragment, laughter, summer wind, and a name he hadn't heard in decades. He picked up the photo with shaking fingers. "Where did you find this?" he whispered to no one. "Funny," said a voice behind him. "I thought you'd remember." He turned around sharply. Emma stood in the doorway, barefoot, wearing a soft gray robe. Daniel stared at her. "Who are you?" She stepped into the room. "Someone who remembers more than you. I never met you before this week. You're an actress." She smiled sadly. "No, Daniel. I'm not." "Then what is this?" He held up the photo. "This isn't part of the arrangement." Emma walked closer, looked at the photo, and nodded. "Your mother took that. Just a week before everything changed." He stared at her in disbelief. "How do you know that?" Emma met his gaze. Her voice was quiet. "Because I was there." Daniel's breath caught. That's not possible. But deep down, something was shifting in him. That photo, the dress the woman wore, the field in the background. It was real. A memory. A forgotten corner of his life that had somehow resurfaced. Emma looked away. "You blocked it out." "You had to. It was the only way to survive." "Survive what?" he asked. But she didn't answer. She walked past him, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared out the window. The city lights flickered below. "I didn't come to ruin your life. I came to finish a story you forgot you were part of." Daniel leaned against the doorframe, mind racing. This was supposed to be a business deal. 1 week. A fake wife. She looked back at him. And yet, here we are. He wanted to tell her to leave. To call the agency. To end this bizarre nightmare. But he couldn't. Because deep down, something about her felt right. Familiar. Like an echo from a life he had tried to forget. The next morning, Daniel canceled all meetings. He didn't leave the apartment. He sat at the kitchen island, staring at the photo, sipping his coffee. She walked in, calm as ever, and opened the fridge like she'd lived there for years. "You used to hate coffee," she said casually. He didn't respond. Instead, he asked, "How do you know me?" She leaned against the counter. "I knew your mother. I knew your real father. I knew what happened the night your world changed." Daniel looked at her. "You're saying everything I know is a lie." "No," she said gently. "I'm saying it's only half the truth." He didn't know whether to believe her, or fear her. But one thing was clear. This woman hadn't come just to play a role. She had come to expose something buried deep in his past. And Daniel was no longer sure he was ready to find out what that was. The silence in Daniel's penthouse had a strange weight to it. It wasn't the quiet that comes from stillness or peace. It was the silence you feel when your world begins to shift, when the ground beneath your feet no longer feels solid. Daniel sat at the edge of the leather sofa, staring at the photograph Emma had left on the table. His younger self stared back at him from the picture, beside a woman whose face stirred something in the back of his memory, a flicker, a name, a feeling. But it wouldn't come. Emma was in the kitchen again. She moved naturally, like she belonged in his space. She boiled water for tea and pulled a mug from the top shelf without asking where anything was. Then she reached for the tiny jar hidden behind the espresso pods, a jar Daniel hadn't touched in years. It was his mother's favorite loose-leaf tea. The kind only she drank. No one knew about it. No one. He stood and walked toward the kitchen slowly. How did you know that was there? Emma didn't look at him. She dropped the tea leaves into the infuser and said softly, because she always kept it there. Tucked away, behind the coffee, so your dad wouldn't complain about the smell. Daniel's throat tightened. He had never told anyone that. How do you know that? He asked again, louder this time. Emma looked up. Because I was there, Daniel. I told you, I remember. He turned away from her, walking toward the window, gripping the cold steel railing. The city lights glittered far below, distant and indifferent. But inside him, memories were rising like smoke, impossible to hold but impossible to ignore. Emma walked over and placed the tea beside him without a word. He didn't drink it. Instead, he turned. You said you knew my mother. Emma nodded. More than knew her. She saved me. Daniel's jaw clenched. Saved you how? Emma took a breath. Her voice was steadier now. When I was 10, my mother abandoned me. Dropped me off at a church in Westbridge and never came back. I bounced through foster care for years. But then your mother found me. Volunteering. Teaching art to kids no one wanted. She was different, Daniel. She saw me. Daniel's face softened just a little. She did that, even when we had nothing? She did it because you had nothing, Emma said. She knew what it was like to be forgotten. That's what made her kind. Daniel's hand rested on the photo again. Why didn't she tell me about you? She wanted to, Emma said gently. But you were already going through so much. And then, after the accident, it all ended. Daniel's shoulders tensed. That night. He rarely thought about it. The police had called him. Rain was falling hard. His mother's voice on the phone had been rushed, scared. Then silence. The next time he saw her, she was cold. Still. Gone. Emma nodded slowly. It wasn't just a car accident, Daniel. There was more to it. Much more. Daniel turned to face her again, eyes narrowing. What are you saying? Emma looked straight at him. I came to tell you what really happened. He stared at her for a long time. He wanted to demand answers. To shout. But something stopped him. Fear. Because what if she was right? What if everything he believed about his childhood, about his parents, about himself, was based on a lie? Later that night, Emma walked down the hallway and stopped at the farthest door. The one Daniel never opened. His mother's old study. It had been locked for years. He watched from behind, heart pounding. Without hesitation, she pressed the small panel hidden behind a painting, just to the left of the doorframe. It lit up, a keypad. He hadn't touched it in over a decade. He barely remembered the code himself. Emma typed it in slowly, carefully. 4 to 2, 7 to 9, 8. Click. The door opened. Daniel stepped back, stunned. Who told you that code? Emma didn't answer. She walked in slowly, brushing her fingers along the dusty bookshelves, the scattered art supplies, the stack of journals Daniel had never dared to read. Daniel followed her inside. It was exactly as his mother had left it. Nothing moved. Nothing touched. But Emma walked through like she'd been here 100 times. He watched her open a drawer beneath the desk and pull out a small, black notebook. Daniel's eyes widened. That was hers. Emma nodded. She wrote everything down. He stepped forward. Give it to me. But she held it back. Not yet. There's something you need to see first. She turned the pages slowly, until she found what she was looking for. A newspaper clipping. Old, yellowed. Taped to a page. Daniel leaned in. It was a photo of a man. In a business suit. Sharp eyes. Cold smile. The headline read: Local bank executive mysteriously resigns amid fraud investigation. The date was 3 weeks before his parents died. Daniel's blood ran cold. That's my father. Emma nodded. Your real father. The man you've been trying to forget. Daniel snatched the notebook and stared at the article, his chest heaving. What the hell is this? Emma lowered her voice. Your father wasn't who you thought he was, Daniel. He was involved in something dangerous. He made enemies. Your mother was trying to protect you. Daniel backed away, shaking his head. No. No, he was strict, sure, but he wasn't. He was being followed, Emma interrupted. Watched. He knew. That's why your mother started keeping records. Notes. Clues. She was scared. Daniel flipped through the pages, dates, symbols, maps, lists of phone numbers. It looked like a code, a diary of fear and warning. She was going to tell the police, Emma said. But she never got the chance. Daniel looked up slowly. You think he was murdered? Emma looked him in the eye. I know he was. Silence fell again. Daniel walked to the edge of the room and leaned against the wall, breath unsteady. Everything was unraveling. His memories. His family. His life. And this woman, this stranger, was pulling it all apart. Or was she? Was she a stranger? He stared at her again. The way she moved. The way she spoke. The way she knew things she shouldn't. Why now? He finally asked. Why come back after all these years? Emma held his gaze. Because I finally found proof. She pulled another photo from her bag. This one showed a man in a parking garage. Gray hair. Expensive coat. Stepping into a black SUV. The photo was dated just last week. Daniel recognized him instantly. His father's old business partner. The one who vanished after the investigation. The one Daniel believed had died years ago. He's still alive? Daniel asked, stunned. Emma nodded. And I think he's the one who made your parents disappear. Daniel gripped the photo tightly. His hands were shaking. Everything was changing. Every truth was now a question. Every memory now felt like fiction. And standing in the middle of it all was Emma, his fake wife, who wasn't fake at all. What do you want from me? He asked, voice hoarse. Emma looked at him, her voice steady. I want you to remember. I want you to help me finish what your mother started. I want the truth to come out. Daniel looked down at the journal. At the old clipping. At the coded notes. Then at her. He had built a life of power, wealth, and control. But now, all of it felt meaningless. He thought he had hired someone to play pretend. But what he got was a woman with a key to his past, and maybe to his future. And the truth? It was far more dangerous than he ever imagined. The next morning came quietly, as if the city outside was holding its breath. Daniel stood at the edge of the terrace, the cold wind brushing his face. He hadn't slept. The journal Emma gave him was still clutched in his hands, worn and fragile like the truths it held. Behind him, Emma moved softly, sipping coffee as if it were any ordinary morning. But nothing about this was ordinary now. The woman he thought was a rent-a-wife had unlocked more in 24 hours than anyone had in his lifetime. And now, she was saying his parents didn't just die, they were taken. Murdered. He turned to her. You said there's proof. But not just the photo of that man. Emma nodded. The photo only confirms he's still alive. But there's more. Much more. Daniel stepped inside, gripping the journal. Where? Emma looked up, her voice calm. There's a room. Below the garden at the old house in Riverdale. Your mother's safe room. Daniel stiffened. That house has been abandoned for years. I haven't been back since they died. Emma placed her coffee down. That's why it's still hidden. Daniel paced the room, torn between disbelief and something deeper, something inside him he hadn't felt in years. Hope. If this is true, he started. Emma finished for him. Then someone made you believe a lie your entire life. He looked at her. Her calmness wasn't arrogance, it was purpose. She wasn't just playing a role anymore. She was leading him somewhere he'd buried long ago. He gave a slow nod. Let's go. The drive to Riverdale was quiet, but heavy with unspoken questions. Trees blurred past the windows as Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter than he needed to. Emma sat beside him, watching the world outside, but every so often glancing at him. I know this is hard, she said gently. Daniel didn't respond. She added, but there's a reason I waited this long. I needed you to be strong enough. He turned to her briefly. Strong enough for what? Emma looked away. To know everything. The Riverdale estate was still there, barely. Tall grass had swallowed the once beautiful front yard. The iron gate was rusted and broken at one hinge. The windows were dusty and dark, and ivy crawled up the walls like veins on a dying body. Daniel stared at it as they pulled up, memories crashing down like waves, Christmas mornings, broken windows from backyard soccer games, his mother's laughter echoing through the halls. And then, nothing. He stepped out first, followed by Emma. The house creaked as they opened the front door, the smell of age and forgotten memories rushing out. Dust lay thick on the floor, untouched for years. Downstairs, Emma whispered. Daniel led the way, the wooden steps groaning under his weight. They reached the basement, and she guided him to the far end, where an old gardening table leaned against the wall. Emma moved it aside and knelt down. Behind it was a small, cement hatch, almost invisible in the dim light. It had a tiny lock, rusted shut. Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, silver key. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Where did you? Your mother gave it to me the last time I saw her. She turned the key. The hatch opened. A steel ladder descended into darkness. Daniel hesitated. But then he saw Emma's face, calm, certain. He climbed down. The air below was cold. The room was small, but not empty. There were shelves lined with documents, photographs, videotapes, and journals. And in the center, a table with a single folder. Daniel opened it. Inside were copies of financial records. Dozens of them. All marked with names he vaguely recognized, names tied to his father's old firm, and others linked to international shell companies. What is all this? He murmured. Emma stepped beside him. Your father was laundering money for powerful people. He tried to back out. That's when things turned ugly. Daniel flipped to the next page. It was a letter. From his mother. Dated 2 days before the accident. Daniel. If you ever read this, then I couldn't protect you. Your father and I were in too deep. But I had to try. The men he worked with won't stop until everything's erased. I'm trying to leave breadcrumbs, so you'll know the truth someday. I love you. Stay strong. Mom. Daniel swallowed hard. The words blurred through tears he hadn't expected. Emma placed a hand on his arm. There was no comfort, just understanding. He looked back at the documents. Why didn't anyone find this room? Emma replied, because it was off-grid. She had it built in secret. I helped paint the walls when I was 13. Daniel shook his head, still processing. So, what now? Emma looked at him. Now, you do what your mother couldn't. You expose them. He turned to her. Who exactly are they? She pointed to a photo on the wall. A group of men at a formal event. One of them was Daniel's father. The other was the man from the parking garage photo. And beside him, Daniel gasped. That's Senator Harrow. Emma nodded. He was the money behind everything. Real estate fraud. Offshore accounts. Political bribes. And when your father wanted out, they made sure he'd never talk. Daniel's head spun. How do you know all this? Emma hesitated. Then said, because I used to work for them. Daniel froze. What? Emma stepped back. Not directly. I was a courier. A runner. I delivered files, information, whatever they needed. I didn't know at first who I was working for. But when I found out, I tried to leave. Daniel's jaw clenched. And they came after you? Emma nodded. Your mother was the only one who helped me. She hid me. Protected me. And then she died. Daniel stared at her. Everything she said lined up. The documents. The key. The journal. And yet. You came back into my life as a fake wife. Emma met his eyes. Because I didn't think you'd listen otherwise. I had to break through the world you built around yourself. Daniel walked away for a moment, then turned back. And now what? We just leak this to the media and hope for the best. Emma shook her head. No. We build the story. Slowly. Safely. We find more proof. We gather names. We release it when they least expect it. Daniel looked around the room again. Years of silence. Years of secrets. And now, it all sat in his hands. I'm in, he said finally. But if we do this, we do it right. Emma smiled. Agreed. But as they climbed out of the secret room and stepped back into the dim basement light, neither of them noticed the motion sensor blinking near the broken window. Someone had triggered it. And far away, in a black car parked on a dark street, a man with a phone watched a blinking red dot on his screen. He spoke quietly into a headset. They found the room. Activate Plan B. The night felt heavier than usual, as if the world itself sensed danger was closing in. Daniel and Emma drove back to the city in silence, the tension thick between them. The air inside the car was loaded with questions Daniel couldn't ask yet, and Emma didn't want to answer too soon. But unknown to them both, someone else was already on their trail. Inside a sleek, black SUV 2 blocks behind, a man with a thick beard, earpiece in one ear, and ice-cold eyes watched every move they made. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. He simply tapped on his phone and sent a message. Target is in motion. Wait for my signal. Back in Daniel's penthouse, things were no calmer. Daniel stepped inside and immediately drew the curtains. He turned off his phone and disconnected the security cameras. Emma sat at the kitchen counter, scanning through a small USB drive she had brought from the secret room. The files were heavily encrypted. Names, dates, transactions, dangerous truths that could destroy powerful men. Daniel looked over her shoulder. How long will it take to decrypt those? Emma replied without looking up, not long. I've already cracked 2 layers of encryption. I just need time. He poured himself a drink. Time's the one thing we may not have. Emma paused. You felt it too, didn't you? Daniel nodded. We were being watched. They shared a silent glance, the reality setting in. What they had discovered wasn't just some dark family history, it was a live wire in a nest of explosives. Emma closed the laptop and stood. We can't stay here tonight. It's not safe. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You think they'll come for us? She didn't flinch. I know they will. An hour later, they were packed. Emma took only the essentials: laptop, USB, journal. Daniel grabbed his passport, a change of clothes, and a small pistol he hadn't touched in years. They exited through the service elevator and slipped into a rental car Emma had booked in someone else's name. No phones. No trackers. By 3 a.m., they were outside the city, heading for an old farmhouse Emma said belonged to a friend. She's an ex-journalist, she explained. Off the grid for years now. She'll help us. Daniel glanced at her. You really did plan all this? Emma didn't answer. She just stared ahead, her face unreadable. But the deeper they drove into the countryside, the more uneasy Daniel felt. Something was wrong. The trees on either side seemed to whisper secrets, and every turn felt like it led deeper into something they couldn't reverse. Finally, they arrived. A small, wooden house stood at the end of a gravel path, half covered in ivy and surrounded by overgrown grass. A porch light flickered as they pulled up. Emma got out first. Lena, she called. A woman opened the door slowly. She was in her 50s, tall, with sharp eyes and a calm presence that made you feel she knew more than she let on. She hugged Emma tightly. I've been waiting. Daniel introduced himself awkwardly, but Lena only nodded. You've gotten yourself into something ugly, haven't you? He nodded. She led them inside. You're safe here, for now. By sunrise, Emma was back on the laptop, and Lena was reviewing physical files Daniel had brought. It was like a mini war room: maps, articles, flash drives, names scribbled on the wall with red markers. Daniel sat on the edge of the couch, watching it all. Why are you helping us? He finally asked Lena. She looked at him over her glasses. Because I used to chase these men. Write stories about them. Until they chased me back. I lost my career, my family, everything. She pointed to the wall. That man right there, Senator Harrow, he had me blacklisted after I exposed his offshore holdings in Dubai. Nothing stuck. He walked away clean. Daniel stared at the photo. He was at my father's funeral. Emma added, of course he was. He needed to make sure the secret died with him. Lena leaned forward. You're holding a fire in your hands, Daniel. If you leak this without care, they'll paint you as a crazy millionaire with a conspiracy theory. You'll lose credibility. Or worse. Daniel was quiet. Then he said, so how do we win? Lena smiled darkly. We make it impossible to bury. One piece at a time. They worked in shifts. Emma decrypted files, Lena verified leads, and Daniel used his contacts under false names to retrieve property records and court documents that could connect the dots. But as the sun set that evening, a subtle noise in the woods changed everything. It was faint, just a crunch of leaves. Then another. Daniel stepped to the window. A red laser danced briefly across the glass. His heart dropped. Get down, he shouted. The glass shattered with a loud crack as a silenced bullet tore through the room. Emma screamed and hit the floor. Daniel grabbed the pistol from his bag and pulled her toward the hallway. Lena grabbed her shotgun from under the kitchen table. Go to the cellar, now. They ran as more bullets tore through the wood walls. Smoke grenades rolled in next, thick, choking, gray clouds filling the small house. Daniel coughed violently, pulling Emma along, as Lena fired 2 deafening blasts from her shotgun toward the front door. The attackers were closing in. In the chaos, Daniel found the cellar hatch in the pantry floor. He yanked it open. "Emma, go." She slid down first. Daniel followed and shut the hatch. The last thing they heard before the hatch closed was Lena shouting something in Spanish. And then, silence. The cellar was damp and pitch black, but Daniel's heart pounded louder than his footsteps. He could hear Emma breathing fast beside him. He fumbled for the flashlight in his bag and clicked it on. Dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts. "Are you okay?" he whispered. Emma nodded, still catching her breath. "Daniel, they found us." "How?" Daniel shook his head. "I don't know." He suddenly remembered the blinking red light at the old Riverdale house. "The motion sensor," he muttered. "They've been tracking us since yesterday." Emma's voice trembled. "Lena. We don't know if she's..." Daniel stopped. "We can't assume anything." They moved deeper into the cellar, away from the hatch. There, in the far corner, was an old workbench. Emma sat down and pulled the USB from her jacket. "We can't stop now. If they're attacking, it means we're close to something they're scared of." Daniel agreed. "Then we need to finish this. And fast." He pulled out his laptop. Emma looked at him in surprise. "I thought we left all tech behind." Daniel smiled. "I brought one. No GPS, no Wi-Fi. Just for this." Together, they opened the last remaining file. What they found stunned them both. The final folder was labeled Project Rainlight, Final Phase. Inside, contracts. Wire transfers. A voice recording. The recording was scratchy but clear. A man's voice, Senator Harrow's, was speaking. "If Michael Daniels doesn't comply, make it look like an accident. No loose ends. We can't afford risks with the Cayman accounts exposed. His wife is already a problem. Handle it." Emma covered her mouth. Daniel went pale. There it was. Proof. Not just speculation, a murder order. And then another voice, fainter, but familiar. "Understood. He'll be gone by Monday." Daniel clenched his fists. "That voice, that's my godfather. Peter Knox." Emma looked shocked. "He's on their payroll?" Daniel nodded slowly. "He was executor of my father's will. He handled everything after the accident. All this time, I trusted him." He stepped back, dizzy. The floor felt like it was tilting. "Daniel, breathe," Emma said quickly, grabbing his hand. "We'll release this. We'll bury them." He nodded weakly. And then his phone buzzed. He had forgotten he turned it back on while copying files. A message lit up the screen from a blocked number. "You were warned. Stop digging, or you won't see tomorrow." Daniel looked at Emma. "No more hiding," he said quietly. "We're ending this. Tonight." The silence inside the cellar was absolute, like the world above had vanished or been wiped clean. But inside Daniel's chest, his heart pounded like a warning drum. He looked at Emma. "This," he whispered, holding up the flash drive like a piece of fate, "is everything." She nodded, her eyes still red from smoke and fear. "But now what? How do we make the world believe us before they shut us down?" Daniel didn't blink. "We go public. We go loud." Emma hesitated. "We need a platform big enough. One they can't bury." Daniel pulled out a small, old business card from his wallet. It was slightly worn, the corners curled. A name written in thick black ink, Carter Bishop. "Who's that?" Emma asked. Daniel's voice tightened. "An old college friend. Turned journalist. Now a rising name in independent media. He runs a live podcast, millions of viewers. More importantly, he's fearless. He won't fold." Emma's eyes narrowed. "Can we trust him?" Daniel stared at the card for a long second. "We don't have another choice." By sunrise, they climbed out of the cellar. The house above had been wrecked. Windows shattered, walls shredded with bullets. But Lena was gone. There was no body. A trace of blood led into the woods, but no sign of her. "She knew escape routes," Emma said softly. "She planned for this." Daniel sighed. "I hope she made it out." They gathered what little was left: documents, USBs, 2 burner phones Lena had hidden in a hollowed-out book, and slipped away into the forest. 6 hours later, Daniel and Emma arrived at a quiet, run-down diner near the edge of the state border. No cameras. No attention. Just the smell of stale coffee and fried eggs. Daniel used the burner phone to call Carter. "Who is this?" Carter's voice crackled through. "It's Daniel. Daniel Mercer." A long pause. "No way. You've been off the grid for days. Some say you left the country." Daniel looked at Emma. "I need to go live. Tonight." "You're serious?" Carter sounded breathless. "I have evidence. The kind that'll burn down half the political elite." Carter didn't hesitate. "Location?" Daniel hesitated for only a moment before giving him the coordinates of a small recording studio Carter once used in college. "An abandoned media lab behind the university's campus. We'll be there in 2 hours." The drive was quiet but tense. Daniel rehearsed what he'd say, how he'd show the files. Emma clutched the flash drive like it held life itself. But something gnawed at both of them. The warning message Daniel had received, it wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. As they arrived at the old studio, Carter was already there, setting up lights and equipment like a man on a mission. He wore a black hoodie, his hair messy, eyes bloodshot. When he saw Daniel, he grinned. "You look like hell." Daniel smirked. "You should see the other guys." Emma introduced herself quickly, and they wasted no time. Carter connected Daniel's laptop to the live stream system. Cameras were tested. Microphones checked. Stream delay was reduced to 0. "This will go out to over 4 million subscribers live," Carter explained. "And once it's out forever." Daniel looked at the camera lens, then back at Emma. "Ready?" Carter asked. Daniel's voice was quiet. "Let's do this." The countdown appeared on the monitor. "Live in 5, 4, 3, 2. "Welcome, everyone," Carter's voice echoed. "Tonight's broadcast is different. Tonight, you'll hear something that could change everything." He turned to Daniel. "Our guest tonight needs no introduction, Daniel Mercer. Billionaire investor. Son of the late Michael Daniels. But tonight, he's not here as a businessman. He's here as a whistleblower." Daniel leaned forward. He looked directly into the camera. "My name is Daniel Mercer. My father didn't die in a boating accident. He was murdered." The live chat exploded. Viewers poured in. Comments filled the screen. "What? He's lost it. I knew something was wrong with that story." Daniel held up the flash drive. "This contains files that prove a group of powerful men, senators, judges, investors, were operating a global money laundering and asset stripping ring. My father found out. They silenced him. He played the recording. Senator Harrow's voice echoed. If Michael Daniels doesn't comply, make it look like an accident. The chat went wild. Carter's jaw dropped. Daniel followed up with encrypted transfers and hidden accounts, $10 million moved to offshore banks, tied directly to Peter Knox, his godfather. He laid out the timeline. The evidence. The betrayal. He paused only once, to reach for Emma's hand under the table. She nodded. And then, Daniel ended with, if anything happens to me after tonight, you'll know why. But I will not be silenced. Not anymore. The screen went black. The stream ended. They all sat in silence. Carter finally whispered, "Holy hell." Daniel wiped sweat from his forehead. Now we wait. Emma exhaled slowly. Or run. 30 minutes later, all hell broke loose. News outlets began calling. Social media caught fire. Hashtag Daniel Mercer trended within the hour. Comments ranged from support to skepticism, to outrage. But the damage was done. Daniel's files were already being duplicated and uploaded to independent archives. Thousands downloaded it. Millions watched the stream again. It couldn't be erased now. But as they celebrated inside the studio, a quiet ping sounded on Emma's burner phone. She checked it. A single image. It was Lena, bloodied, tied to a chair, her face bruised. A message below. You went public. Now you pay. Emma froze. Daniel read it. He turned pale. Carter asked, "What is it?" Emma handed him the phone. Daniel's voice was cold. "They've taken her." Carter stood up. "Where is that photo from?" Emma's fingers shook as she zoomed in. "There. The wall behind her. That paint color, it's a warehouse. I've seen it before. In an old article." Carter blinked. "You're not serious." Daniel stood. "We're going after her." Emma protested, "Daniel, they could kill you too." He snapped, "She protected us. Saved us. We owe her more than hiding behind a live stream." Carter said, "I'm coming too." "No," Daniel said. "You need to keep this story alive. Upload the rest. Release every file. If we don't come back, don't let this die." Carter clenched his jaw. "You have 24 hours. Then I go live again." Daniel nodded. An hour later, they found the warehouse. Emma had been right, it was the same one featured in a news expose Carter had published years ago. A forgotten facility used by a now-defunct private security firm, once funded by Senator Harrow's business partner. As they approached in the dark, Daniel whispered, "We don't go in loud. We go smart." They crept along the fence. The building was dimly lit inside, only one guard at the main entrance. Emma spotted a service tunnel nearby. They slipped through. Inside, the air was damp. Mold clung to the walls. Every footstep echoed like thunder. They heard a voice. And then, Lena's weak laughter. "I told you people, you're sloppy," she said. Emma peeked through a crack. Lena, though bloodied, was smiling. Daniel whispered, "She's buying us time." He pulled out the pistol again. Emma reached for the fire alarm on the wall. "On my mark," she said. 3, 2, now." She yanked the alarm. The warehouse lit up in red strobes. Sirens blared. Guards shouted. Daniel burst through the door. Shots fired. Emma ducked behind crates and flanked right. Within seconds, chaos exploded. Daniel took a bullet in the shoulder but stayed up, adrenaline rushing. He fired back, grazing one attacker. Emma slammed one guard with a metal rod, knocking him cold. Daniel reached Lena and cut the ropes. "We're getting you out of here." Lena coughed blood. "Took you long enough." Together, bleeding and exhausted, they ran back through the tunnel. They escaped into the night. By dawn, the trio was hiding at a safe house Lena had once used in her reporting days. Daniel's shoulder was patched. Emma was bruised. But they were alive. And the files were still spreading, picked up by news channels, downloaded globally. Peter Knox resigned within 24 hours. Senator Harrow faced federal investigation. The machine was cracking. But so was Daniel. He looked at his reflection in the window, once a detached millionaire, now a hunted man bleeding for justice. Emma came behind him and rested her head on his shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. He didn't answer. He just stared at the rising sun. One more battle awaited. The sunlight spilled through the broken blinds of the safe house, casting long shadows across the wooden floor where Daniel lay quietly, his shoulder bandaged, his face still pale from blood loss. Beside him, Lena rested on an old couch, a damp cloth on her forehead, her body weak but breathing steady. Emma sat at the table with her head buried in her arms. She hadn't slept all night. No one had. They were alive, but only just. The files Daniel had leaked were tearing through the world like wildfire. Headlines screamed his name. "Billionaire exposes global conspiracy, senators resign in wake of Mercer leak," and "Who is the woman behind the whistleblower?" flooded every major outlet. The video of Daniel's broadcast had reached over 70 million views in less than 48 hours. But now came the real danger. Because the men he exposed, those still in power, weren't just going to vanish quietly. And Daniel knew it. By noon, the street outside the safe house buzzed with unmarked cars. Men in suits walked back and forth. Snipers were rumored to be perched on nearby rooftops. The FBI had been dispatched. They wanted Daniel, for protection. But he wasn't sure whose protection they meant. "We don't run anymore," Daniel said, his voice hoarse. "We face it. Everything." Emma placed her hand on his. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "It's time the world saw everything. Including who I really am." 3 days later, Federal Courthouse, Washington, D.C. The courthouse was overflowing with people, reporters, protesters, security personnel. The air was thick with tension. Dozens of news vans lined the streets. The leak had shaken the very core of the nation's institutions, and now, the man behind it all stood ready to testify. Daniel wore a plain black suit. No tie. No jewelry. No signs of the billionaire he once was. Just a man, humbled and haunted. Emma walked beside him, her hand steady in his. Lena followed, bruises healing but spirit intact. She refused to stay behind. "I started this," she said, "I finish it too." Inside the courtroom, the world watched. Television screens across the globe showed Daniel taking the stand. His name now etched into history as the man who dared to speak when everyone else stayed silent. He cleared his throat and spoke with a voice that trembled, but never broke. "My name is Daniel Mercer. I was born into wealth. I lived in a mansion. I had everything. But I also had questions. About my father's death. About the people he trusted. And when I started digging, I found more than I ever imagined." He told the entire story. From the mysterious message in his father's watch. To hiring Emma. To discovering the truth. To almost dying. To exposing it all. For 3 straight hours, he gave names, dates, accounts. He handed over the flash drives. The original recordings. The financial trails. And when he finished, the courtroom was silent. Even the judge stared in awe. Outside, crowds gathered, chanting his name. Justice for Daniels. Down with corruption. Truth wins. But Daniel didn't smile. He looked around for Lena. She stood quietly in the corner, watching him with the gaze of someone who had seen too much. And Emma? She had tears in her eyes. You did it, she whispered again. But Daniel shook his head. Not yet. 2 weeks later, Emma's apartment, Brooklyn. Emma was folding laundry when the knock came at the door. She opened it slowly, cautious. Daniel stood there. His suit was gone. His expression softer. He looked real. Human. I didn't think you'd come, Emma said. I didn't think I'd leave, Daniel replied. They stood in silence for a moment. Can I come in? He asked. Emma nodded. Inside, everything was modest. Simple. The kind of life Daniel never knew existed before her. He glanced around, then took a seat on the couch. You disappeared after the trial, Emma said gently. I needed to think, Daniel replied. Needed to figure out who I was now that the secrets were out. And? I'm not a billionaire anymore. The board voted me out. My assets are frozen. I'm under federal protection. But I've never felt freer. Emma smiled softly. So what now? Daniel looked into her eyes. Now. I find a new reason to live. She tilted her head. And what reason would that be? You, he said simply. Emma's heart skipped. But. I was hired, remember? This wasn't supposed to be real. Daniel nodded. At first, no. But you became more than a role. You became the only truth in a world full of lies. You challenged me. Saved me. Stood by me. And somewhere along the way, I fell for you. Emma said nothing. But her eyes said everything. 1 month later. National Awards Gala. Lena walked across the stage in a flowing black gown, the entire auditorium on their feet. The announcer's voice rang out. For bravery in investigative journalism and aiding in the exposure of one of the largest political scandals of the decade, we honor Lena Hart. Lena held her award with trembling hands. I never thought I'd live to see this day, she said into the mic, but truth has a strange way of surviving. Daniel and Emma clapped from their seats, their fingers intertwined. 6 months later, small town, Oregon. The snow fell gently over the quiet town as Emma stepped out of the bakery holding 2 cups of coffee. Daniel waited on a bench nearby, a scruffy beard growing on his face, wearing a thick jacket. He looked nothing like the man who once lived in penthouses and private jets. And he preferred it that way. He took the coffee and smiled. What now? Emma asked. Daniel took a sip and exhaled deeply. We write. We speak. We travel. We help people who were silenced like my father. Emma nodded. And us? Daniel turned to her. We heal. 1 year later, Daniel's memoir hits bestseller lists. The Hired Wife, How a Lie Led to Truth, shook the literary world. Daniel's raw and emotional account became a sensation, not for its scandal, but for its vulnerability. He told the world about love, grief, betrayal, and hope. He donated all proceeds to support whistleblowers and investigative journalists. Emma, listed as co-author, finally told her side. And Lena started her own independent news agency. Final scene, Michael's grave. Daniel stood alone at his father's grave. The wind whispered through the trees. He placed a single white rose on the headstone. I understand now, Dad. You tried to protect the truth. And I failed you for years. But I hope I made it right. He stood in silence. Then turned to leave. Emma waited for him by the car. As they drove away, the radio played a soft song. Something about second chances and starting over. The lesson. Sometimes, what begins as a lie leads us to the deepest truths. Sometimes, those we think are strangers become the ones who save us. And sometimes, the ones who seem lost, are just beginning to find their way.